Good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining me today on this Procurement Act 2023 webinar. We'll do some introductions in a second. We have got quite a lot of people signed up for today, so we'll just do some intros and housekeeping whilst people are joining this session. My name is Gillian Askew. I'm one of three co-founders and a director of Go for Growth. We're a social enterprise, a micro-social enterprise dedicated to supporting the marketplace and especially smaller providers and voluntary sector providers who wish to start out and grow in the public sector. And I'm delighted to be joined today by my colleague Annalise Fothergill from YPO in the contracts team, who is bringing her excellent knowledge and expertise to bear today on this Procurement Act webinar. So thank you, Annalise, for joining us. What I will say before we get started is a couple of things. We are recording the session today. We are on Zoom, so we are recording the session, and a copy of the recording and the slides that we're using today will be sent out to all registered attendees, usually within 48 hours of the webinar. So they will come out to you. So please feel free to take notes if you want to, but everything that you see and hear today will come to you afterwards. We are trying to cover a fairly big amount of information in a very short amount of space today. So we will be working at a pretty high level, and it will be a rather fast sort of canter through. We're going to focus primarily on competitive flexible framework today, although we're wrapping around with a few other bits. And it is really early on into the progression of the Procurement Act 2023. We're not even a couple of months in. So this is a super early insight into CFP and what's going on and a few other things as well. So if anybody does want a more detailed conversation or to have a chat about the Procurement Act or public procurement in general, whether you're a procurer, commissioner, contract manager, or a provider in the marketplace, contact details are on the slide deck, so please feel free to get in touch outside of this session. So what we're going to cover today is we're going to have a quick look at the National Procurement Policy Statement. We are going to look at the competitive flexible framework. My colleague Annalise is going to talk us through what YPO are doing, the approach that they're taking. We'll have a really super quick look into dynamic markets and the state of play on dynamic markets as it stands. We'll also have a look at the central digital platform, supplier registration and information, and we'll pull in some figures that if you are in procurement and you're going to the communities of practice, you might have seen these numbers before, but for providers in the marketplace, just to give some context about how many suppliers are registered, how many buyers are registered, how many opportunities are out there, that kind of thing. And then we'll finish up with a quick look at the support for providers that is on offer and how we can help providers navigate the regulations. We have, if we've got time, carved out a little bit of space for questions at the end. What I would say is, please do feel free to do two things. You can say hi and introduce yourself on the chat if you would like to, but the Q&A and the chat are both enabled today. So please don't feel you need to wait to the end for questions. If you've got questions as we go through, please do pop them in the chat or the Q&A functionality, and we'll try and answer as much as we can as we go. If we do end up, because we are short on time, of not being able to get to all questions today, as we've done before, Annalise and I will take those questions away and we'll answer them as we send out the slide deck and the recording. So we will answer everything that's posed, even if we don't get time to do that live in the session this morning. So enough from me for a second. I'll hand over straight away to Annalise to just give us a brief introduction into herself and who YPO is.
Thank you, Jill. So I'm a contract officer at YPO. YPO stands for the Yorkshire Purchasing Organisation. We are based in Wakefield and we were formed in 1974 by 13 local authorities who came together to combine their buying demands and achieve efficiencies. We now have 71 associated members and we are the largest public sector buying organisation for education. So whilst we are based in Wakefield, we do cover the whole of the UK and have frameworks in place to meet the whole of the public sector needs. So our customer base includes the whole of the public sector, including education, universities, higher education, nurseries, childminders, blue light services across the UK, including fire, ambulance, police, charities, social enterprises, housing associations, NHS trusts, local authorities, and central government and minister departments such as MOD, HMRC. So in total, we have over 30,000 plus customers. We do have a product range as well of 23,000 products, and we do have 2 warehouses, and we also have at least 100 frameworks. So whether it's pens or paper, computers, furniture, electricity, food, insurance, we can help customers get the best deals around and stay compliant. We are 100% publicly owned, we are self-funding, and we are not for profit. So everything we do is about giving back to the public sector and providing effective solutions for customers. So last year, YPO celebrated its 50th birthday. And since the dividend scheme started in 1992, YPO have returned over 164 million to the public sector. So that's just a bit about YPO. And I'll hand back over to Jill now.
Thank you, Annalise. It always astounds me actually just the reach and impact that YPO has across the public sector marketplace. So thank you for giving us that insight. The National Procurement Policy Statement. If you're in procurement on the call today, you will definitely know about the NPPS. If you're a provider in the marketplace, you might not be aware of the National Procurement Policy Statement. Effectively, if the regulations are the what we're doing and the policies and principles around public sector procurement, the National Procurement Policy Statement, I guess, is the why and the how, and it sort of describes the things that are important to public sector. So it sets out the strategic priorities for public procurement and how contracting authorities can support it. And it came into effect on the same day as the regulations, 24th of February 2025. And it speaks to delivering value for money. So it talks about any procurement that's covered by the Act. A contracting authority must have regard to the importance of delivering value for money, and achieving that value for money is always the overarching priority in public procurement. So that looks at optimizing the use of public funds by balancing things like effectiveness, efficiency, and economy over the whole of the life cycle of a product or a service or the works to achieve the intended outcomes of the procurement. And that includes, and it's embedded in wider socio-economic and environmental benefits and impacts. And what you can see on the screen are the 5 key headline areas. And if you've looked at mission-driven government, you will see a real playback of what the government laid out as being really important to them. So you can see those 5 key core aims on the slide. There is a real focus in the National Procurement Policy Statement and the spirit of the Procurement Act 2023 around that delivery of value for money, really focusing on opening up accessibility and inclusivity to small to medium enterprises and voluntary sector organisations, so VCSEs, voluntary community and social enterprise. And the definition that I am using in terms of a small and medium enterprise is 0 to 249 employees. And a small business would be 0 to 49 employees. And it talks about driving economic growth and strengthening supply chains by giving small and medium-sized enterprises and VCSEs a fair chance at those opportunities. And in turn, that will create high quality jobs, and it'll also champion innovation in our local economic areas. So delivering social and economic value that supports these government missions that we can see on screen, including working in partnership across organisational boundaries where appropriate, and ensuring that we've got the right commercial capability and standards in place to procure and manage contracts effectively, and to collaborate where we can across contracting authorities to deliver the best value. So it actually speaks very specifically to SMEs and VCSEs. So it talks about contracting authorities, and I'm quoting this actually, contracting authorities should drive economic growth and strengthen supply chains by giving SMEs and VCSEs a fair chance at public contracts, creating high quality jobs and championing innovation. And that was further strengthened or demonstrated by the release of a procurement policy note, a PPN 001 in February 25, which mandates actually for central government departments, their executive agencies and non-departmental bodies to set targets around spend with SMEs and VCSEs. So they're tasked with setting a 3-year target for direct spend with SMEs and a 2-year target for direct spend with VCSEs to be achieved in the financial year ending March 2028 and publish those results annually. So whilst that's mandatory only for us, actually a small subsector of the wider public sector at the moment, looking at central government, it's voluntary for the wider public sector. So actually we were watching with interest over the next 12, 24 months to see how many public sector contracting authorities do think about setting those direct spend targets. And direct is a really key word, I think, with SMEs and VCSEs. That widening participation agenda isn't a new agenda, but it is really well embedded in both the National Procurement Policy Statement and the spirit of the Act itself. So we do hope that lots of organisations will embrace this going forward. Annalise, I'll hand back to you for competitive flexible procedure and an insight, if that's okay.
Thank you, Jill. So the competitive flexible procedure is a new procedure under the Procurement Act 2023, and it replaces several previous procedures. It is a multi-stage procedure, so it must have a minimum of 2 stages. It is designed to offer greater flexibility, and it gives contracting authorities the freedom to design its own procurement process, which can incorporate numerous elements such as negotiation, dialogue, demonstration, a test stage, for example. So the contracting authority will often use preliminary market engagement to ensure that the design element of the competitive flexible procedure is right. So the design of the procedure itself must be proportionate to the contract's nature, complexity and costs. And that is what the Procurement Act 2023 says. How the multi-stage procedure will work must be clearly set out in the tender notice and the documents to ensure fairness and transparency. The procedure allows the opportunity to modify and refine the requirements as the procurement progresses, provided this is clearly set out in the tendering documents. The outcome of the competitive flexible procedure may be an open framework, which can last up to 8 years, provided it is reopened at least twice, once in its first 3 years and another time during the next 5 years. Or the outcome of the competitive flexible procedure might be a closed framework that can only last up to 4 years, or it could be a contract. So one of the aims of the competitive flexible procedure is to help encourage innovation, which should ensure that the solution procured best fits the contracting authority's needs, which hopefully will reduce the risk of failed procurements and money, time and effort wasted for both the contracting authority and suppliers. It can be utilised for many different requirements, such as simple, low risk, niche, complex requirements, research and development of a new solution perhaps. So as long as it is proportionate, the contracting authority can design its own procedure to fit their organisation and procurement objectives. So for example, when a school is procuring a new cashless catering system, they could build a procedure that has 3 stages. So the first stage could include the procurement specific questionnaire and the initial conditions of conditions of participation stage. And at this point, all suppliers who meet the requirement would be accepted onto the next stage. Stage 2 could be then a system demo to reduce the number of suppliers, maybe to 5 based upon the criteria set out in the tender documents. And then stage 3 could be a final tender stage involving award questions and pricing to identify the most advantageous tender from the 5 suppliers invited to this stage. So let's look at YPO's approach to a competitive flexible procedure. So before we need to work out which procedure is going to be the best fit for what we are trying to achieve. So firstly, we need to consider the procurement outcomes. What is it that we're procuring? What outcomes are we wanting to achieve? Does it need to be compatible with another system? Is a prototype needed? Can it be procured without a site visit or a demonstration or test of some kind, in which case a one-stage open procedure might be best? So secondly, we need to consider the market. Is there innovation in the market? Is there strong competition, or is it just a few dominant players? For example, if there's just a few suppliers in the market, is there any need to undertake a multi-stage process if the outcome can be achieved in one stage? Or are there many different ways to achieve the desired outcomes where it is crucial to have a dialogue stage to understand each variant and what it can achieve before writing that final tender? So it's really important to consider preliminary market engagement, and we would encourage this. But before you undertake this, you need to consider what it is that you're trying to achieve from this market engagement. It can be used informally or formally and can be used to establish, for example, helping you to develop your spec. It can help you design the right procedure and get the conditions of participation or award criteria right. So, for example, if everyone prices differently in the market, you might have to understand everyone's pricing structures to be able to then you work out how best to ask for the pricing schedule, perhaps, or how to design your pricing schedule that's going to meet everyone's requirements. You might use engagement to help you prepare the tender notice and associated documents. It could be used to identify suppliers in the market that you were not already aware of. It can also be used to help look at any special contractual terms that might be needed. So, for example, we know software often has end user license agreements that might need to be built into a contract. It can also be used to help build capacity amongst suppliers. So if there are new suppliers in the market, do they need a little bit more support in understanding the procurement process and what a good bid looks like, for example? One of the other considerations has to be timescales and the assessment period that you're working towards. So a competitive flexible procedure is going to take longer than a one-stage open procedure, and each stage will need to allow time for responses to be assessed and the outcome provided to suppliers. So what are the timescales that a contracting authority needs to consider? Well, under Section 54(4) of the Procurement Act, the minimum tendering periods depend upon the type of contract or circumstances. So I would recommend that you take a look at this part of the Act, depending upon the type of contracting authority you are and the circumstances that apply to you. So, for example, there's no minimum tendering period for a light touch contract. If you're having a participation stage, then the minimum timescales are 25 days, unless there is a state of an emergency. And in the Act, a state of emergency is not just the fact that you've left it to the last minute to undertake your procurement. That does not cut it as a state of emergency. Then at the tendering stage itself, the minimum time periods again vary. So it could be 25 days where the tenders are submitted electronically and the tender notice and associated documents have all been provided at the same time. Or it could be 30 days where the tenders may be submitted electronically and the tender notices and associated documents are not provided at the same time. And again, that can be reduced to 10 days where you've already submitted a qualifying planned procurement notice, or again, if there's a state of emergency. So it really does depend. So we would really recommend that you look at that section of the Act to help you decide what the timescales are for your specific procurement and your contracting authority. So again, when thinking about timescales and the number of stages that you're going to incorporate, it is really important to have regards to the nature and complexity of the contract. So if it's a really complex specification, you need to think, do suppliers need longer to be able to respond to this tender? So we know that this is a new procedure. At YPO, we're recommending at the moment that we're allowing longer periods of time than the minimum timescales for suppliers to get their head round registering on the central digital platform, having a look at the new layout of the competitive flexible procedure. So you need to consider that kind of thing. Is the need for subcontracting amongst the suppliers? Does the supplier need to engage with subcontractors to help you respond to your tender? So these are the kind of things that you need to consider when setting those timescales. There might be a need for a site visit or physical inspections. where you might need to consider making sure that there's the panel available to be able to do those site visits and undertake those system demos. So it's about looking at you as a contracting authority as well and considering how are we going to kind of work this out amongst ourselves, and when do we need to do each stage of the process and who's available for that evaluation. So there are no limits to the number of stages or supplementary processes that can be included in the competitive flexible procedure. However, contracting authorities do have a duty to ensure that the procedure is proportionate, having regards to the nature, complexity, and cost of the contract. So overcomplicated procedures can limit competition and fail to achieve best value. So we would always recommend that as a contracting authority, you consider the added value of each stage in your competitive flexible procedure. If each stage doesn't add any value, then we would recommend it is not included. So let's have a look at YPO's potential approach to a competitive flexible procedure. So we potentially have two competitive flexible procedures that we may be advertising in the coming months. At the moment, we're undertaking preliminary market engagement. So we have issued a preliminary market engagement notice, and we've got a supplier webinar planned for the 14th of April to provide pre-tender information on the bidding process and a high-level overview of our requirements. The webinar's aims is to give all suppliers an opportunity to ask tender and requirement related questions in an open forum and to familiarise themselves with the new competitive flexible procedure which will be used to carry out the procurement exercise. We are potentially considering a 2 or 3 stage process with the aim of reducing the number of suppliers at each stage. So we're considering a request to participate stage, which will include the procurement specific questionnaire, conditions of participation, and maybe a shortlisting question. And then we're considering then an assessment of tender stage, and then finally a system demo stage. With it being IT related, we want to see the system in action, and we would be evaluating that system demo against a set criteria that we would set out in the tender documents. So when the tender is released, the assessment criteria and awards criteria for each stage will be published with the tender documents, so it is clear what suppliers will be assessed against. This will include how the system demonstrations will be assessed so that everyone has the same information, and the process should be transparent from start to finish. The conditions of participation set must be specific to the tender and will include areas such as the legal, technical, and financial capacity required for the contract. Any shortlisting questions may, for example, involve the suppliers talking about their experience to undertake a contract in the form of a case study, perhaps, to show that they've got the necessary experience to deliver the services that we require. Suppliers will have the opportunity to raise clarification questions at each stage of the process. So you've got to think about this. When you're designing a multi-stage, it's only right that you have new clarification periods at each stage of the process. At the end of each stage, the suppliers will be informed of the outcome and if they've made it through to the next stage, and feedback will be provided in relation to any scored questions in the form of an assessment summary. It may well be that we choose to refine the award criteria as the procurement progresses, and if we do decide to do this, it will be made clear in the tender documents. And if we do change the award criteria, we will issue an updated tender notice and allow suppliers to consider the amendments. However, any refinement of that award criteria as the tender progresses should not change the outcome of the earlier stages in the process. So if you change a criteria and it could affect who's been brought through, then that is not permissible. So YPO are part of a mini communities of practice group for the early adopters of the competitive flexible procedure, where we can share best practice and with other contracting authorities and ask any grey area questions with the Cabinet Office. As the procedure is still new, if YPO cannot find the answers to any of our questions in the guidance documents or on the Communities of Practice Forum website, we do have the ability to raise questions through the procurement reform inbox. YPO have raised a number of questions to procurement reform, and usually the straightforward ones get answered within a few days. However, some of the more complex questions can take longer for a response to be received. So just bear that in mind. So whilst I've talked about the approach that YPO is taking, let's actually look at some competitive flexible procedures that are currently live on the central digital platform. And let's have a look at what other people are doing.
Thanks, Annalise. Before I move the slide on, there's just a quick question if we could take it. We've talked about minimum tender periods of 25 and 30 days. The question is there a maximum period under competitive flexible procedure where the contracting authority must publish an outcome of the tender?
Oh, it's a good question. You would probably set your validation period within your tender documents, which you should stick with. So I think the process and the timescale should be clearly set out in your tender notices. And if there's any updates to that, I think you should publish the updates. It is a good question. I know the regulations and the guidance documents say that you should let suppliers know the outcome at the earliest opportunity. So there shouldn't be long delays between a tender being received and it being assessed. So I would say that as soon as practically possible, you should be letting suppliers know. But again, you need to consider the number of responses that you're likely to get, your availability of your evaluation panel, and make sure that that validation period that you set is realistic.
And I think it's a good point in there that transparency around actually it should be very clear, that validation period, and when you are expected to be informed about the results. And if for any reason a contracting authority can't meet that, they should be proactive in their communications to let bidders and providers know that there will be some delay in that timescale. So thank you. I will move the slide on. Annalise, thank you.
Thank you. So this is a live opportunity at the moment on the central digital platform, and you can see it's for an IT managed service provider. It looks like there's an initial tender submission deadline of the 14th of April. Now, I've actually had a look at this tender notice, and it looks like they're proposing a 4-stage process. Stage 1 would be the Procurement Specific Questionnaire and Conditions of Participation. And then it looks like the Stage 2 would be initial tender stage, which they're proposing to carry out in accordance with the assessment process and award criteria set out in the tender notice. And they are using this stage to shortlist to a maximum of 5 suppliers to participate in stage 3, which would be a negotiation stage. So or the top 5 suppliers will then go through to the stage 3, which would be the negotiation stage. And at each stage, suppliers will be informed of the outcome, whether they've been successful or unsuccessful, and feedback given. And then at stage 3, there's going to be negotiation meetings, and suppliers at this stage will be given the dates and times of the meetings. And stage 3 will conclude with the issuing of letters to all participation suppliers confirming the closure of negotiations. And then stage 4 will be the invitation to submit final tenders. And this contract start date is planned for the 1st of October 2025. So you can actually see that the timescales are a lot longer than a normal open procedure.
Yeah.
And then there is another opportunity on Central Digital Platform issued by Norfolk County Council for an education system to support various education functions. This looks to involve a dialogue stage. So it's a 3-stage process by the looks of it. Stage 1 includes the asking bidders to complete the invitation to initial tender stage. in accordance with the timescale set out in the initial tenders. If there are 4 bidders or less who pass the grounds for exclusion, the minimum standards, and are willing to comply with the contractual requirements, then those bidders will be invited to a dialogue stage. They're saying that if there's more than 4 bidders who pass the participation stage, the council will evaluate the responses in another form that you're asked to complete, which determines how suppliers will deliver the contract. So it looks like it's going to be a scored award question, well, award question, but a scored question to determine how suppliers will deliver the contract. And the top 4 scoring bids will then go through to the dialogue stage. So stage 2 is dialogue, where bidders will be able to refine their bids, including pricing. And the council does reserve the right to amend the specification scenarios for demo, pricing, spreadsheets, and the terms and conditions before requesting final tenders. And at the close of the dialogue stage, bidders will be issued with an invitation to final tenders, including the final specification, scenarios for demos, pricing, spreadsheets, and the terms and conditions. And then stage 3 is the final tenders, where bidders are also required as part of that stage to demo their system in accordance with the scenarios in the invitation to tender. Just thinking about timescales that they've actually set for this opportunity. So the timescales, we know there's timescales for stage 1 because that's the initial submission deadline of the 24th of April. Then for stage 2, the estimated dates for dialogue are between the 23rd of June and the 30th of July. The timescales estimated for stage 3 for deadlines for final tenders is the 15th of September. The dates for demos is set at the 20th to the 24th of September, and the contract award notice and standstill is due to commence on the 10th of November. So you can actually see that it's a good 6 to 9 months for that procurement once it is live. So that you, again, the competitive flexible procedure is not a quick procedure, but it could produce a really good fit for the contracting authority if it's done right.
Brilliant. Thank you, Annalise. There was a couple of questions. One I'm going to pend until the end, I think. One was just a real quick one. So the market engagement event that YPO are running on the 14th of April, is it possible for us to share the FTS link for people to sign up to come along to that event at all, Annalise?
If you go into the if you go back to that slide, there's actually a link to the preliminary market engagement notice in there.
Is there?
And I believe all the details of how to
Okay.
register are in that notice.
Okay, perfect. That will be in the slide deck that comes out to everybody, and that will be a live link that you can click through from the slide deck as well. So hopefully that's useful. And what I will do is make sure that they go out as quickly as possible. Thank you ever so much, Annalise. That was really useful. I'm going to canter through the next bits actually, just because I think we have got some questions coming at the end, which would be good to table. On dynamic markets, it's a fairly quick overview in that probably it's of no surprise that there are no dynamic market currently live on the Find a Tender service as it stands at the minute, or certainly when we pulled this presentation together a week ago. And at that point, there were only 2 intention notices, both from utilities as well at the time. When Annalise and I have been chatting, our understanding is that dynamic markets actually are going to go back through primary legislation to be able to be utilised under threshold. And because it has to go back through primary legislation, that will take time. So the message at the minute is the mitigations for if you're not able to use dynamic markets because these are under threshold opportunities that you're addressing. The message for mitigations are if you have a current DPS, you can extend that up to February 2029, providing that you do that extension this year. Or as an alternative, use an open framework in the meantime until that has gone back through primary legislation. I was asked yesterday in a webinar how long that might take. It's a little bit of an unanswerable question, but I think I personally think, so please don't hold me to this, but I think it would be in excess of 12 months in terms of a cycle. So it's certainly not going to be any time in the immediate future. Dynamic markets as a product they have rolled up DPSs, so there are lots of similar attributes in that they are an electronic system, they're an open mechanism, they are there to engage suppliers, they do allow suppliers to join at any time. The big difference with dynamic markets and DPSs, of course, is that dynamic markets should only be used for above threshold spend, unlike a dynamic purchasing system. So we will keep an eye on dynamic markets actually and just see what the contracting authority, wider public sector procurement market does with them and see if any do come out. So we've got more webinars planned to keep our eye on Procurement Act over the next 12 months. So we'll keep an eye on that. It might be a bit of a moving target and we'll see where that goes. In terms of the central digital platform, one of the key points we wanted to talk about, so the find a tender service has always been where we would go to find above threshold tender opportunities. The central digital platform and find a tender service are the same thing. So the terminology that was used as we were ramping up towards the regulations being put in place was the central digital platform. It is an extension of the find a tender service. So they are the same thing. So we are seeing that there's a little bit of confusion around what is this central digital platform? Where do I find it? It is the find a tender service. And I've included a link here that you can go to that will take you to it. There's a couple of key things to note about the central digital platform if you're a provider. So you can search for opportunities without being registered to the Find a Tender Service central digital platform. But if you want to interact with those opportunities, if you want to bid anything, you must be registered to the Find a Tender Service. You will be entering your supplier information into the Find a Tender Service. I've included a tutorial video on there for you. It's a 20-minute long video, but you can go to each section independently in the video if you want to fill your supplier information out. And that's key for three things. So you'll get a unique identification number when you register on the supplier information service, and you'll also get your share code. Both of those things will be needed when you're bidding for public sector opportunities. But the purpose, I guess, of the supplier information system, for the benefit of providers on the call today, the information that we put in there should pull through from the central digital platform, the Find a Tender Service, into the procurement portals, which we will still be using to bid through. So that information we put in there, which is around our company, we've got some economic and financial standing information in there. We go through mandatory and discretionary exclusions. We can enter in our accreditations, etc. So all of that information, we shouldn't have to double handle and double input when we're actually live into procurement opportunities. And over the life, and we've got some timeline information, but over the life of the central digital platform, we should be adding more information that we can upload as suppliers at the front end through the supplier information system, like our insurances, for example, potentially our use of some subcontractors in the future. And it's all really an aim to try and streamline and make it more efficient, that process for providers. What you can also see on the screen is how you select a notice type. So, and this is for both buyers and providers, actually. If you're searching for opportunities, you will be able to search for the different notice types, whether that's governed by the public contract regulations of 2015, which are still live for those products that were put out into the market pre-24th of February 2025, and also those notices that are attributed to the Procurement Act 2023. And of course, the notice regime is different between the two sets of regulations. And in the box, you can select a notice type when you're uploading your opportunities. So make sure that you are choosing the right set of notices to put out there. And we'll talk through some of the notices, but it does, I think at the latter, I mean, you won't be choosing public contract regulations for when you're going out to market, because all procurements that are new now going out will be governed by Procurement Act 2023. But when you are doing some of those notices that are midway or further through the process, there is just a sense check for buyers to make sure that they are using the notices that are relevant to the legislation under which the procurement was run in the first place. So if that's Procurement Act 23 or Public Contract Regulations of 2015. So just a sense check. There are some notices out there that potentially should have been put out under PCR 15 and have gone out under Procurement Act 2023. And in terms of where we're at, so these figures were generated by the Cabinet Office and they are accurate as of the 24th of March, 2025. So 11,768 suppliers registered, 21,578 users, over 2,000 contracting authorities and over 1,300 notices. And what we are seeing is 7 pipelines, 389 pre-market engagement notices, 53 planned procurements, 452 tender notices, 127 transparency notices, and then we've got contract award notices of 59, contract detail notices of 260, contract change of 1. And so we are seeing the activity ramp up. Now, what we did see was, as to be expected, a bit of a hockey stick of activity just before Find a Tender went into hiatus before the regulations became live. So it's a bit of a flurry of activity in that last week or so up to the 24th of February. But there are notices being put out there on the system now and lots of users getting registered. So the activity numbers are certainly growing. And from a timeline perspective, the procurement review unit is live, so that took over from the PPRS. And there are 7 suppliers being investigated by the PRU, all linked to Grenfell. So that's the debarment process that was launched as part of the regulations. Pipeline notice is launched as of April 2025. And we've got implementation phase, support for events, regular stakeholder communications and building case studies throughout spring and summer of 2025. From a to be confirmed perspective, so register of commercial tools, payment under public contract notice and additional modules for that supplier information, as I've talked about, and the contract performance register. And really, just to finish off with today, some headlines of what we think this means to suppliers and how we can remove barriers for them. So we do have concurrent regulatory frameworks in place. So lots of procurements are live still under public contract regulations of 2015. And lots of procurements are live also on the Procurement Act 2023. And so Go for Growth is coaching around 20,000 suppliers. We have been coaching on PCR 15 and we will continue to do so, and we'll also continue to support on Procurement Act 2023 and especially on competitive flexible procedure. I think what Annalise has really done well for us today is bring to life that actually each procedure will be really unique and different. And although there are some commonality in that, it has to be a multi-stage process. How those stages will be used and how many stages there are will differ procurement to procurement. And so we'll build our knowledge over time in terms of the competitive flexible procedure. I think initially when supplier debarment was talked about, there was some fear around it. Actually, supplier measurement and contract management is a real place of focus under Procurement Act 2023. There's lots of transparency on it. And actually, that's a real positive, I think. Most suppliers, the vast majority of suppliers, work really hard and really well, achieve KPIs, manage their contract performance really well. And actually, some of the public elements of that performance information can be a really useful growth tool for suppliers and not necessarily something to be nervous around. And then really for both buyers and suppliers to think about, I'm not going to talk through this whole list. This will come out to you, but just a couple of things to pull out. the planning and preparation stage, especially for smaller organisations, is really crucial. So the more activity we can have in that pre-market engagement space is really helpful to providers. And so actually, can we consider what we do under the threshold as well as above the threshold? Lots of smaller organisations are often engaged in below threshold opportunities, but still that preparedness, that time to prepare is really important. Where we can break down larger contracts into smaller lots, where appropriate, we should try and do so. And I think there's some encouragement of lotting in the regulations anyway. So thinking about whether we can use the constructs of the Act to be inclusive and accessible to small to medium organisations, and thinking about those contract terms and bid requirements and simplifying. It's part of not just identifying those barriers for SMEs and VCSEs, but taking reasonable and practicable steps to remove those barriers so that smaller organisations can take part. And the final thing, and we've got one question that I would like to try and get to. I know we're at time, but I think it's an important question. This is the contact detail slide. For providers on the call, there is a short course on Procurement Act 2023. If you'd like to take it, it is a live link in there as well. And I'll stop sharing. And Annalise, I'll just do this question really quickly when I can find it. So there was a question around in what situation could we foresee changing an evaluation criteria without it being seen as an issue in and of itself? Is there an example where that might come into play, Annalise, that you can think of?
So I don't think the evaluation criteria should be changed. I think it's the award criteria that potentially could be refined. I think it's probably going to happen if there's going to be negotiation stages and you're hearing the same theme from different suppliers, like there's, you need to get this element right or everything's not going to work. But even if you allow for criteria to be refined, how much you can refine should be set out in those initial tender documents. So it shouldn't sway the outcome too much. Well, it shouldn't sway it anyway, but you need to be transparent. So if you are going to change or refine the award criteria, you should be stating reasons potentially why. And again, if suppliers are not happy, they do have the procurement review unit to take any issues to that can be investigated, or you can raise clarifications as to why it's been changed if you're not having that clarity with the reasons why it's been refined. But yeah, it should be set out in the initial document. So you'd only probably think it's going to be 5 or 10%.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. We have got a couple of other questions, but given that we've already reached time, what I'm going to suggest we do, as I said we would beforehand, if we ran out of time, we would take the questions away. You can share this tutorial with whoever you want. It will be on our YouTube channel, so you can share this far and wide if you want to. And we've got a couple of questions that we'll answer when we send the slide deck out. So all that remains for me to say is, firstly, thank you, Annalise, so much for that today. That was really insightful and really useful. Thank you for your continued support. And thank you to everyone for attending. And we hope we'll see you on another Go for Growth webinar very soon. Thanks ever so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.